Hey, I'm Osman Faruqi, and this is The Drop, a culture show from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, where we dive into the latest in the world of pop culture and entertainment. I'm here with Thomas Mitchell and Mel Kembry. Tough week for you guys. Thomas, your boy Drake took a pretty big L. Mel, your girl Dua Lipa released a deeply mid album. Are you guys holding up? All right?
Yeah, holding up okay. I mean, I think Dua's probably come off a little better than Drake, but I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit.
Yeah, I've always been excited to go on the record defending possible predators. So, yeah, just another week in my life.
We'll be talking a lot more, perhaps unsurprisingly, about the feud between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, its origins, how it's played out, and what kinds of consequences it could have for the pair, the wider rap scene, and the music industry more broadly. We're also going to be talking about the Dua album and some other big pop releases that we're into at the moment. And finally, we'll be discussing The Fall Guy, the Australian shot action comedy starring Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. But first, this week, it was the first Tuesday in May, which means the Met Gala was on.
It's fashion's biggest night.
The Met Gala is the party of the year.
The Met Gala, the annual celeb-studded fundraiser held to benefit New York City's Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Finally, I'm here.
I was moving house on Tuesday, so I did not pay very close attention to this one, though I did get the sense from social media that it seems to be taking up more and more attention every year. It's kind of gone from a fashion-focused fundraiser thing to just being like a key part of the pop cultural calendar every year. Does that ring true to you guys? What kind of stood out from this year's Met Gala?
Yeah, I reckon that's totally true. And I think it makes sense because the Met Gala feels so right for our online generation. It's all spectacle and no substance. It's all about conscious illusion and artifice. And it's also, unlike other big events, red carpet events, it's just purely based on celebrity. You have to get the invite from Anna Wintour. You can be anyone. You don't necessarily have to be there because, you know, you've been nominated for a film. So you also get quite a broad and interesting sweep of people, which sets it up for real kind of viral moments that are perfect for the internet. What stood out from this one? I actually think maybe it was the kind of lack of those big moments, those big talking points. Like, when I think back to some of the outfits in the past, Jared Leto in that cat, Doja Cat as a cat, Lil Nas X, remember when he wore that all silver outfit, Kim K had that big stocking thing. There's been some really big moments, and I don't really think there are any huge talking points from this Met Gala in a way. People seem to play it really safe, and I also think the other thing that stood out was the theme clearly confused a lot of people. There was not like a lot of cohesion in what people were wearing, and I think Anna Wintour's actually apologised. She kind of potentially saw this coming because she apologised in advance that maybe the theme had been a bit confusing.
Well, the theme was like garden of something, but people just took the garden bit more literally?
Yeah, well, the theme was Sleeping Beauties, reawakening fashion, but then the dress code was the Garden of Time, which...
the Garden of Time. I see,
yeah. Which Anna Wintour obviously now realises was too complex for people. So I think it did come through on the carpet a lot. Like, it was not really clear what people were dressing up, and everyone had quite a different take on the theme.
Yeah, I just saw lots of photos of it was like Hugh Jackman in a tux, Chris Hemsworth in a tux. Like the Australian guys just doing what Australian guys do and disappointing everybody. But like, I guess Zendaya was the big one that everyone was talking about. I guess generally, though, it felt like this was set up to be a big kind of flashpoint because, I mean, it's hard to avoid the optics of something like that. Difficult right now with everything that's going on in the world. People love to kind of have that conversation around big celebrity events when there are these huge, global events also happening at the same time, and especially with something like the Met Gala that isn't, like an award ceremony or at least something broader, people are always going to be like, well, do we need to be doing this right now while, everything that's going on in the Middle East?
Yeah, when we talk about the Met Gala, but really the way that we consume it publicly is the celebrities outside the Met Gala being photographed as they enter. We don't really get a lot from what goes on inside. I saw someone on social media being like, so what happens in the Met Gala? And it's just
does happen in the Met Gala?
It's like a fundraising dinner. I think there are some speeches and people sort of eat food and wander around. They take selfies. There's occasionally like videos that emerge of Jennifer Lopez running into other celebrities in the bathroom. There's an episode of Dave, the show that you still refuse to watch, Thomas, which is set inside the Met Gala in an episode. That's the closest I've come to understanding what the Met Gala is like inside.
Yeah, and Oceans. There's an Oceans set in the Met Gala as well. That's entirely what I'm basing it on.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Oh, the Ocean's 8.
Mm.
Yeah, they're not very good oceans. Not because of, the fact that they gender flip. It just wasn't that good.
Of course not.
As a movie. Yeah, to your point, Thomas, about the incongruous nature of it this year, Marina Hyde, who I normally really enjoy reading, she's a Guardian UK columnist, had a piece this week arguing that during times when the news is very heavy and grim, an event like the Met Gala serves as a distraction to it, just something we can sort of zone out and watch these people wear their outfits. But I mean, I think there's an argument that in some instances, like the opposite can also be true. It felt particularly this year, I think, to do with the timing of it, just very odd where every second post was a celebrity being photographed. And then the posts after that were like clips or news stories of Israel's invasion of Gaza. The Met Gala is deeply apolitical and like always has been. And it's another contrast to events like the Oscars. It's not just about it not being an award ceremony, but you do see, even if most celebrities aren't embracing a political message, we have seen in this awards, in the last kind of 12 months of award season at least, people wearing pins, making speeches. None of that happens at the Met Gala. Anna Wintour keeps a pretty tight leash on that. There was this quote from Suzanne Collins that I saw doing the rounds yesterday. She's the author of The Hunger Games, and she said that she was inspired to write that series because in the early 2000s, she was watching TV and it was reality TV being interspersed with clips of the invasion of Iraq. And it's sort of that I think quote has been finding a lot of resonance this week because people are saying, well, the Met Gala and the invasion of Rafah happening at the exact same time. It's sort of hard to disconnect those two things. It's a big question, but I mean, is this escapism that we all need? Is it a distraction? How do you think people should be feeling about this?
Yeah, like I think I can kind of see both sides because, I mean, it's easy to say something like the Met Gala is completely unnecessary and like in bad taste right now. But then it becomes, for me, a question of like, well, where do you draw the line? Like we're about to spend however long discussing Drake and Kendrick arguing over the internet. And you could so easily make the same argument that like, that's so ridiculous that you would even give that airtime right now with everything that's going on. And like, I think it does become this thing where at some point, I guess you have to decide that you can, I don't know, that these two things can coexist and it's okay to talk about both or have both. Like it's really tricky because you don't want to be seen to be like, oh, well, I'm just putting that out of sight and, whatever. Like, unfortunately, it's not impacting me, so I can just enjoy the Met Gala. But I do think sometimes there is this like inclination to just then call everything shallow and all we can all be talking about and focusing on 24/7 is like what's going on in the Middle East. And yeah, I think it creates this like lose-lose situation a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's funny that the dress code, The Garden of Time, is based on the name of a short story by J.G. Ballard, who wrote this story in 1962. Okay, this is a bit fun fact from your resident reader. But it is kind of funny. The short story is about this kind of rich couple who live in an estate where the air is bright and the weather is warm. They live in this beautiful kind of fantasy land. And then one day they look out onto the dry and barren plains and they see like people labored with heavy loads kind of around their neck and the kind of rabble sets up on the horizon encroaching on their fantasy land. And I mean, that's where the rabble. the Met is this garden of illusion and artifice that can't last, but like this couple that have to kind of keep picking flowers, it's not going to last. And I mean, I don't think the Met is trying to be self-referential, but that kind of is it. We're on the horizon kind of enjoying the beauty of this estate, even as we know it's fake.
Yeah, it's a kind of perfect accidental metaphor. I don't expect anything dramatic or political from the Met Gala. I think it does what it does, and that's what it's always done, and that's what it always will do. I think there's probably just certain times in which the ability for some of the wealthiest people on the planet to insulate themselves and pretend nothing else is going on can sometimes feel like a little bit too absurd. I think it's a fair point about the rap stuff, Thomas. I think we'll mention a bit about some of the criticisms of Drake and Kendrick just talking about themselves when there's a lot else going on. One of the things that I just found bewildering, like the appearance of Anthony Pratt, the Australian cardboard billionaire dressed in sort of a pink Willy Wonka suit. And I know that this is a fundraiser and I know that all sorts of just like rich people go to it, but maybe it's because he's Australian. It's like cultural cringe or something, but I'm like, this feels like less exciting than it's felt before seeing him there.
Yeah, and you know how like color analysis is like having a real moment at the moment and everyone's getting it done and getting AI to do it. When I saw him in that pink suit and his face just looks so pink, I was like, that is a case for why color analysis matters. But I also, the other Aussie, you mentioned it earlier, Chris Hemsworth, very bland, wasn't it? Just like a classic 3-piece suit, like just beige. So yeah, I don't know if the Australians had a great showing at the Met this year.
Except for Kylie, obviously.
I didn't see Kylie's outfit.
She looked pretty good.
Troye Sivan as well. Our pop princesses did great.
Okay, so from pop princesses to two people who had nothing to do with the Met Gala at all, it's time to talk about the biggest cultural moment of the week and arguably even the last few years, the incredibly personal, vicious, and deeply fascinating feud between two of the biggest rappers the past decade, Drake and Kendrick Lamar. I guess the freshest development in this saga is the news that one of Drake's security guards was shot inside his house in Toronto on Wednesday morning. The assailant escaped. We have no further details about this shooting or the background or motivations of the shooter, but I mean, it is pretty wild timing considering everything going on. Before that incident, it's worth laying out, I guess, basically where we were at after spending a couple of weeks releasing tracks that were getting increasingly more personal, aimed at each other, allegations of domestic abuse, sex trafficking, and underage grooming. Kendrick was widely considered to have pretty thoroughly demolished Drake's reputation and out-rapped him, kind of culminated in the most recent track that's been released, a track from Drake, 5 minutes long, where he basically spent most of it denying being a pedophile. It's kind of been interpreted as a quiet, strategic retreat from this whole episode. This was, Mel and Thomas, particularly over the weekend when we had multiple tracks being dropped every day. I think safe to say one of the biggest moments in pop culture in recent times. It felt like everyone had sort of stopped to plug in and see what was going on. I'm sure you were getting text messages either from people being like, have you seen it? Or friends asking to explain what was going on. Felt particularly interesting in the era of media fragmentation where we don't tend to all like gather on to one big thing. It definitely felt like the biggest rap beef in years, potentially bigger than the infamous feud between Jay-Z and Nas in the early 2000s. There's going to be ramifications for both of these guys and the direction of hip-hop. There's plenty to discuss, but maybe we'll start with kind of where this starts. And maybe before we do that, it could be interesting to discuss the respective positions of each of these rappers before they got into this feud. Thomas, I'm wondering if you can give us a kind of TLDR on kind of Drake as a rapper. Where does he sit and how does that compare to Kendrick's profile and position in the hip-hop world?
Yeah, for sure. Mel, so TLDR is too long. Don't worry.
I know, nothing's ever too long for me to read.
So basically, I guess like the scene is that you've got Drake, arguably the biggest kind of name in rap pop. He's a hip hop guy, but really he's seen as the pop star of rap. Obviously, you know, enormously successful, signed a $400 million complete global publishing deal with Universal a few years ago, one of the biggest deals of all time, called the LeBron deal of music. You know, obviously we all know Drake's songs. He fills clubs. He tops the Billboard 100 all the time. He wins lots of Grammys. He is kind of like the palatable hip hop star, but really he's a pop star. Then you have Kendrick Lamar, seen as many as, I guess, like the icon of pure hip hop. He is kind of the incumbent to Tupac Shakur. He's seen by purists as the true face of hip hop. He's from Compton in Los Angeles, often seen as the spiritual heartland of hip hop. And, you know, he releases albums that are, you know, really kind of viewed in a more critical lens than anything Drake ever does. He's won a Pulitzer Prize, Mel, which is like a really important prize, basically. And yeah, so that kind of sets the scene in what, I mean, does, even though the feud has gone beyond ridiculous, it set the scene for a really perfect matchup because it was like kind of like this good versus evil, you know, the good guy being Kendrick, who represents the pure art of hip hop, and then Drake being the sellout who represents, I guess, the problems of modern hip hop, according to a lot of fans. So yeah, that was kind of the state of things. But yeah, very much it was these two guys who represented two different schools of thought of where hip hop is at right now.
And I think fair to say, Thomas, like you and I have listened to probably every record that either Drake or Kendrick have made and have a lot of time and respect for what they do.
Yeah, for sure. Like I love both guys. I get a lot of enjoyment out of both of their work for very different reasons. And that's why I think it was such a curious thing at the start to see these two guys go at it who, because in the early 2010s, they were, very friendly and they appeared on each other's tracks. Poetic Justice, the Kendrick song, and Kendrick also appeared on Drake's Take Care album. They toured together. So they were very much like friendly. But then as they both kind of went on their own trajectory and became very big in different kind of crowds, they've drifted further apart. And then now here we are.
Mel, before we really dive into it all, I mean, where do you sit with each of these guys? Do you have a preference for the sounds of either Drake or Kendrick?
No, I think I've always kind of taken the El Paso approach to it. I think both can exist and we can be happy with both and grateful to have both. I've never really nailed my colours to any of their masks. And to be honest, I'm very glad I didn't and I haven't, because I think this whole episode has been shameful and they are both shameful. And I mean, I am disappointed.
All right,
there's the first one.
Yeah,
that's the whitest thing I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm trying hard not to think of this as a battle for relevancy, and I'm listening to you, Oz, and I'm hearing that you're telling me this is about the future of hip hop, but part of me is like, is this about the end of hip hop?
Well, I mean, look, that is not a terrible question to raise, because certainly that is one that a lot of hip hop critics have been discussing. Like, this is maybe in some ways, these two titans that reflect an era that doesn't really exist anymore, having one final throwdown, and we probably will never see anything like this again. I think there's a question there that is worth discussing, but let's sort of delve into how we got here for a minute. So, as Summer said, these guys, they were friends, they collaborated a few times, they sort of went into different lanes for the past nearly decade now, I'd say. But in October, they came back into each other's orbits. Drake released a song called First Person Shooter, which included a verse from another big rapper, J. Cole. J. Cole referred to himself, Drake, and Kendrick as the big three of rap.
Is it Aubrey or me? We the big three like we started a league, but right now I feel like Muhammad Ali.
Didn't kind of feel that controversial at the time. It was, I guess, intended to be respectful and say, hey, we're all pretty cool. I like hanging out with you guys. Hip hop is great. Look at us here at the top. In March, though, this year, things got a bit more hectic. And we discussed this briefly a few weeks ago on the show when Atlanta rapper Future dropped an album with producer Metro Boomin. I thought that album was like fine. There was like a bit of a blow up at the time, but it didn't feel as dramatic as it has since gotten. There was a track on that album called Like That. It featured Kendrick, where he took aim at Drake and J. Cole, explicitly referencing that line about them being the big three.
PTSD, motherfuck the big three. Nigga, it's just big me. Nigga, boom.
Well, that was like definitely a dig at Drake and Cole. It didn't feel like crazy. This is like a big part of hip hop where people are just saying they're better than the others. It's part of the braggadocio culture of hip hop. Didn't really expect things to take the turn that they did, but yeah, we'll get there. Probably the funniest twist, I think, in all of this is J. Cole took that very personally and released a 7-minute long track criticizing Kendrick, and then very, very quickly deleted it and said, I'm sorry, I want nothing to do with this. I don't know if he someone from the future went back in time and told him, dude, you're just going to want to tap out of this one and just go stay at home and have a nice time. Watch Shogun on Disney+.
If anything, though, that has given us one of the best parts of this beef in that, like, the internet has had a field day with, like, well, things have gotten increasingly vicious between Drake and Kendrick. There's all these memes of, like, J. Cole right now, and it's someone, like, walking through a field of grass, like, having the time of their lives. So, yeah, I do wonder if J. Cole is a bit like, well, I'm so glad I tapped out and deleted my song. Or I personally kind of think it's a little bit embarrassing for him.
Oh, you think he should have stepped up?
Well, I mean, like he basically, like, he went in, he involved himself first, and then, like, he really, like, whatever you think of Drake, I think at least he
committed. He committed.
Whereas J. Cole, like, sure, he hasn't then had, like, all this dirty laundry of his aired, but I feel like that will stick with him forever in hip hop, which is famously like a reputation game. He may have made a smart decision, but it's still a decision that paints him as someone who was, like, not prepared to throw it out.
It's so good. I love that he, like, lit the fire and then kind of spider monkeyed out of there.
So Drake decided to involve himself in this in the middle of April. He released his first diss tracks aimed at Kendrick, Push-Ups and Tailor-Made Freestyle. At this stage, I think, like, fair to say that the disses were relatively tame. They mainly focused on Drake criticizing Kendrick's music. Drake listed a bunch of rappers he thought that were better than Kendrick. He had a go at Kendrick for collaborating with Taylor Swift and other pop acts, which felt a bit dumb. Like, out of all the people in the hip hop world who can say you've gone too mainstream, Drake saying that to Kendrick. I don't think really stacked up, but it's what he did. And from there, things got way more personal. Kendrick releases a track called Euphoria and 616 in LA, which accused Drake of having plastic surgery. And most significantly at this stage, Kendrick called Drake a bad father. And we'll get back to why that's such a big deal, but that was probably the first real escalation in terms of this taking a vicious personal turn. The same day, Drake drops a track called Family Matters, where he's like, okay, you brought my son into this. Shit is going to get real now. He says that one of Kendrick's children was actually fathered by his friend and colleague Dave Free, and he accused Lamar of being physically abusive towards his wife, Whitney. 20 minutes after that track came out, Kendrick releases Meet the Grahams, probably like the darkest track in this whole beef. And I say that because even though it really set things to another level, no one really wants to talk about this one too much because of just how brutal it got. Kendrick directly addresses Drake's son, Adonis. He accuses Drake of hiding a second child, this time a daughter. He suggests that Drake is attracted to underage children and accuses him of running a sex trafficking ring out of his Toronto mansion. Yeah, as you can tell, quite a severe escalation in all of this from where it started, from the big three to...
Very different to I'm better than you. Like, it's a big jump to then, like, also you're running a sex trafficking ring.
The next day, Kendrick follows up with another track, Not Like Us. And this is maybe the best song in the whole thing in terms of just like as a standalone track.
Mustard on the beat, ho, Debo, any rap nigga, he a freak throw, man down, call her Amber Lambs, tell him breathe, bro, nail a nigga to the cross, he walk around like Tizo, what's up with these jabroni ass niggas trying to see Compton, the industry can hate me, fuck them all and they mama, how many options you really got, I mean it's too many options, I'm finna pass on this body, I'm John Stockton.
There's sort of early numbers out on stream that this could actually replace Taylor Swift as the number one track on Billboard this week. It has a really catchy beat by DJ Mustard. And on it, Kendrick doubles down on calling Drake a pedophile, who he literally this time says the word pedophile. He parodies Drake's music style. And it's kind of considered at this stage that this is the point where Kendrick has successfully shredded Drake's reputation. He's kind of releasing 2 tracks for every 1 track Drake is dropping, and he's also demonstrated his storytelling and his lyrical prowess, which is the kind of level that he's on compared to a more pop commercial pop star like Drake. The kind of brief code on all of this is a track called The Heart Part 6, which is the final track so far from Drake. He denies the pedophile allegations, but doesn't really land any new blows on Kendrick. So kind of takes us to where we are now, which is a lot of personal vicious rumors aimed at each other, a lot of collateral damage for the people around them in their lives, and a feeling that Kendrick has essentially won, quote unquote, whatever that means, this feud. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. I think maybe where we can start is like why this drew so much attention. I think aside from how big and successful and popular both of these guys are, the rapid fire way these songs are being released, like having 4 or 5 tracks released over the course of a weekend. Like Thomas, you and I were messaging at certain points about a track and then you're like, another track has just been released. And then also how dark a turn these allegations took. Feels like those 2 things just sort of brought so many more people on the periphery of hip hop into this feud over the past week. Talk me through why this became so big, Thomas.
Well, yeah, I think it really was the frequency, you know, like in previous, hip hop feuds, you would wait like, whether it's Nas and Jay-Z or Tupac and Biggie in like the 90s, you'd have to wait like ages for them to go off and like film a video and there'd be like months between, like hit 'em up versus who shot you. Whereas this was basically contained to like a 48-hour period across the weekend. And so I do think for a little while, this feud was kind of existing on the fringes, like people who were really into hip hop were following it. But when it kind of like seized the momentum across the weekend and it was just like track after track after track, I think it did kind of then like bleed into the mainstream, and suddenly people were like, well, hold on, why are these 2 guys like, what is going on here? And then like that coinciding with the fact that it became so personal and these like really intense, allegations were being traded back and forth. And, there's been so much chat, and I think this really plays into it. of all these people saying like, oh, this is why hip hop fans finally get why the Swifties are so excited, because like this Easter egg culture that we're in now, where all of these songs featured like allegations or kind of like winks and nods about things going on. And so you kind of like tapped into people's desire to go on the internet and be like, what are they talking about? What is going on here? So suddenly you had this like volume of content being like flooded into the internet. At the same time, people are like investigating to try and figure out what is going on and who's really like, got the right intel and everything. So it just kind of like this confluence of factors, I think, sees people's imagination. I don't know, that was my experience. I don't know, Mel, as someone who may not be as typically tapped in to, this space, were you across the weekend?
I was across it. I think people also like a train wreck. Like, I don't know, I think what we're seeing here is just both of these people going off the rails, particularly as you mentioned, the claims got more and more intense. And I don't know, like I was interested in it. And obviously, if you recognize all the Easter eggs, you get something different out of this because you're understanding a lot more of the references. But I don't know, I just think it became really gross. And I do think, at least in some parts of the internet, maybe among people who aren't as rusted on hip hop fans, there's like a feeling that this is kind of gross and disgusting to watch. I don't know, do you guys feel that at all? Like, I know you're excited by the songs and the music, and like I get the lyrics are kind of funny and interesting and clever at times, and the songs are legit songs on their own, but do you think there's a level of grossness to this? And
I do want to get into that. I think if it's okay, we'll put a pin in that element of it for a second, because I do think there's a bit around the context to this before we sort of unpack when things maybe spun out of control a little bit. I think, Thomas, your point about Taylor Swift is really interesting, because in some ways this is the first feud in a kind of post-Taylor Swift social media, Reddit, true crime era where like, Rap Genius, or now just called Genius, the website's been around for a long time, where you can like look up hip-hop songs and people can provide annotations and things. But the level of analysis people were doing seemed out of control. Like the track 616 in LA, people are like, oh, 616, that's a reference to Father's Day in Canada. That's a reference to the first season of Euphoria, the TV show about high schoolers having sex that Drake executive produced came out. That's also a reference to a biblical verse. It's also a reference to it could be a reference to one of these things. It could be a reference to three of them or none of them. I think there's an element of just people creating their own lore around this stuff that just grows and grows and grows and snowballs. And I think it's a really smart comparison to sort of put that in the frame, and as ludicrous as it sounds, the way that Swift has sort of trained music fans and others to think about music and lyrics. But one of the things I want to ask you, Thomas, is whether you think this was ever a real or fair rap battle feud. These are two very different kinds of rappers. You laid it out very well at the start. Drake is much more poppy, much more commercial. Kendrick is known for his incredibly complex rhymes, his storytelling. That's the kind of thing that generally wins you a rap beef. Do you think he was always going to come out on top? Were there moments in which you thought Drake had the upper hand here?
It's hard because there's so many quantifiers needed. I love Drake, as you know, obviously pre-potential sex offender Drake.
I believe you said to me that you're the Drake of journalism.
I know, you said that too about me.
I stand by it.
You were raised in the clubs of Sydney in the late 2010s. It makes sense. It makes sense.
Exactly. Take Care is a special album. No, but like I did think that generally there was a consensus that Kendrick was winning from the start and he was always going to win. But when Drake dropped Family Matters on Saturday morning, I think people saw a slight momentum shift. And I say slight because it lasted all of 20 minutes because I think it was a pretty like hard hitting song. And he also recorded a video with it, really impressive like production values. He kind of went all out, probably not anticipating that Kendrick would like cut his legs out.
Had two more in the chamber ready to go straight away.
But my personal take is that obviously before things did get really problematic and weird, and I was kind of like enjoying the drama of this beef for what it was, like there is this mentality in the hip hop world that the critical bar for someone like Drake is so much higher than what people expect for Kendrick. Like, Drake literally raps in Family Matters, like Kendrick just opened his mouth, somebody hand him a Grammy right now. And that is like, there's a lot of truth in that joke. I think Kendrick can kind of like do something or say anything and people will just like fall over themselves to say how amazing and smart he is. And so I, again, before things got really weird, I was kind of impressed that Drake did decide to take this on, and I thought he was doing pretty well. And I thought when Family Matters came out, he kind of took the lead. You know, you've got Kendrick as this really earnest rapper who is so serious, and Drake is the absolute embodiment of internet culture. He responded to most of the tracks with just like funny memes on the internet that people thought were really good, and he was like needling Kendrick. And I said to you over the weekend, Osman, like, stepping out of this, it really is a funny thing to watch because Drake is the perfect foil for someone like Kendrick. He's mean, he's gossipy, he's funny, he's just like, you know, snide remarks, whereas Kendrick is like really, you know, self-serving and really serious. And so it made for a great feud. And I personally thought when Family Matters came out, I was like, oh, Drake actually is holding his own here against someone who people are going to be really quick to give the win anyway. Obviously, Kendrick then released 2 more tracks, especially Not Like Us, I think really like killed the feud off and also took it into an area where even the kind of casual observers or the people really invested like you and I, who were enjoying it for what it kind of was, it started to become harder to get hyped about it because it felt just like...
It's like the Simpsons meme, like, stop, he's already dead. You know?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I generally think it was an interesting reflection for a while at least that, you know, Drake was up against it from the get-go. He was behind the 8 ball. He is seen as this dumb pop rapper. And I was like, oh, I think he gets points for like going into this and holding his own.
Yeah, I think that's why, Mel, and like I promise you we will talk about when things got weird, but I think I just wanted to set a little bit on the bits of the feud that sort of, you know, felt more reminiscent of rap feuds of old, because this has been a part of hip-hop for so long, and maybe for people really outside of the culture watching 2 men in their like late 30s trade barbs seems weird, but this has been in hip-hop's DNA from day one, whether it is the East Coast, West Coast stuff, whether it was the gangster rap versus conscious rap stuff in the 2000s, the postcode wars in the drill scene in UK and Australia. A large part of rap has been people sort of like taking shots at one another, and it's always strayed a bit into like weird territory. Like in the 90s and 2000s, there was a lot of homophobia. There's a lot of accusations of people sleeping with one another's wives. That's always been part of it. A lot of it, you know, that I think is the most interesting for people like Thomas and I probably is when they make fun of each other or take shots at each other for the music that they make. Like the other Drake line I thought was interesting was, you know, Drake said Kendrick's always rapping like he's about to get the slaves freed. Kendrick hit back hard on that, but it's like that's funny, memeable sort of lines that reflect where each other are. And it's sort of, if you take it in a spirit of competition, it doesn't feel crazy. Like, you know, we had Scribble Jam, like hip hop tournaments, rap battles are a place where rappers emerged and established their credentials. So evaluating it on that level for a bit, I think is interesting. And then, yes, I think we do need to talk about whether it went a little bit kind of unhinged. But it feels like Thomas there's more going on here as well. Like there is this long-term animosity that a lot of rappers seem to have towards Drake. And a lot of that really came to the fore with some pretty explicit stuff Kendrick was saying. No need to get into like all the details. There are some people who say that this goes back to 2002 when a rapper called Birdman didn't pay Pharrell for a beat. Believe it or not, there is like a family tree that shows how you go from Birdman on one hand to Drake and Pharrell to Pusha T and all this sort of stuff. So there's like lots of history here as well. But Drake has been the subject of big disses from big rappers for a while. Like Meek Mill, a Philly rapper, had a go at him for using ghostwriters. Probably the biggest thing that happened before this feud was Pusha T revealing on his diss track, Story of Didon, that Drake had a kid. Like that is how the world found out that Drake had a secret son. And for a rapper that really projected this sort of soft boy image, was always at the clubs waiting for a text back, that seemed to really shift the narrative around him. I think the other part of this, and Kendrick addresses this head on, and I think probably none of us are the right people to talk about this in detail, but it is worth mentioning that Drake, unlike Kendrick, has a mixed race background. He has faced accusations of being like a culture vulture, of leaning into blackness when it suits him without paying proper respect. Kendrick mentions that a number of times in these disses. He talks about the way Drake says the N-word. He doesn't like the way he says the N-word. He talks about when Drake goes to Atlanta, kind of like a modern capital of current Southern hip-hop, and goes there to get credibility and cultural clout by working with artists like Migos. There is a pretty intense racial dynamic to this as well. And people point out, well, J. Cole is also mixed race. But the response there is, well, J. Cole doesn't seem to pick and choose as much. Like Drake has done this for a long time when he went to London and started borrowing that sort of South London sound. And it's one of the first times someone's just laid it out super, super explicitly. So it does feel like there's this pent up anger from a lot of the hip hop scene to someone like Drake, who has become so commercial by being able to pick and choose what his kind of racial context is at different times. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so, because there's always been this thing, especially in the last like probably 20 years, of these like fans who feel like they need to like safeguard the true honor of hip hop and what it really means and what it's really supposed to be. But at the same time, that mentality has had to deal with the fact that hip hop and I guess like the wider black culture has become one of the most popular like genres of music in the whole world. And you know, we've had so many conversations on this podcast about, like, for instance, the rise of country music and how, you know, who gets to own, you know, a genre. And I think a lot of like purist hip hop fans have struggled with the likes of Drake, who are kind of like bona fide pop stars, but also like rappers and hip hop. And there has always been this like simmering, you know, tension around Drake. I feel like he spent a really long time at the start of his career battling it and kind of like trying to prove to people that he wasn't just like this punchline rapper who could be made fun of. And for a long time, he was like that sensitive soft boy. And I feel like despite, you know, the constant accusations around that, he kind of just, because of the sheer volume of his hits, he kind of, I guess, like managed to hold on to some kind of cred. But there was always that feeling around him that he wasn't legit, you know, in the true hip hop sense. And I still don't really know how I feel about like that mentality for the genre. Is it a good thing that we still, you know, in this day and age believe that you should try and hold on to like what the genre used to be 20, 30 years ago? Like things change, things develop, and you know, we just have to accept that. But I do think this whole thing has been a flashpoint then for Kendrick to kind of like speak into the echo chamber of all these people who already thought all this about Drake and be like, you know, you're mixed race, you say the N-word when you shouldn't, you're basically a pop star who likes to rap occasionally, you know, and also you take Ozempic, ha ha ha. But yeah, like it just kind of like lit a fuse that was already waiting to blow.
I mean, I think as Oz mentioned, those questions of authenticity have always been built into hip hop. And I think those questions always come to the fore when you see art that starts as quote unquote outsider art, outside of the mainstream, become part of the mainstream. So when you have kids who grew up, you know, on the streets suddenly become billionaires, those questions of authenticity kind of are inherently going to arise, because what made the art form what it is no longer there. So I think like the change is inevitable in many ways, but those questions have still kind of lingered. I don't know if there is, like you said, you don't know what you think is right or wrong, but maybe everyone's authentic is very different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like the issue here is like, obviously there's space in this world for a Drake and a Kendrick to exist. And I kind of think I think it was a weird move for Drake to involve himself in a rap feud like this, because when you go, like, hip hop has evolved, it's changed, there's all these different forms of it now as well. But the format of a rap beef is like stripping all of that away, and you're just going toe to toe, bar for bar, two people trying to prove how real and authentic and brutal they can be to one another. And in that context, a guy who grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, became famous for being a child star on Degrassi Junior High, was never going to beat someone who grew up in Compton who raps about seeing his first execution on the street when he was 9 years old. Like that, just there's no format of a rap feud where Drake would have won from that. And maybe it's like good on him for at least trying, but it's like you're in a different world. Be happy in that world. Like no one asked you to respond to the pretty soft initial Drake diss saying that he was, you know, it was Big Me, not Big Three. I find that to be a strange decision for Drake. Maybe he thought the payoff is, I'll get a bunch of streams, but then the risk is, well, actually, you're in a weaker position than you were before you entered it, because now everyone thinks you're an alleged sex criminal. It just doesn't seem to have worked out.
Yeah, but like how hard is it to, you know, it's easy for us to sit here and say that, but this is a guy who, you know, is like basically on top of the music world. As I said before, signed the largest publishing deal in history like a few years ago with Universal. Everything and everyone around him is telling him he's probably the greatest rapper to have ever lived. Like, do you think he's got any perspective left to not have the ego to involve himself in this? Like, of course he doesn't. Like, you know, And again, I think, probably he saw this as an opportunity to be like, wow, all the things I haven't conquered, maybe I could take on the one guy that people really see as like above me right now in terms of credibility or, just like bankability. Like Kendrick has always had that kind of mystique. And, like I said, that almost like the Tupac Shakur thing around him where like everyone just universally is like, well, Kendrick is the man. And, I definitely see a reality where Drake is so high on his own success that, there was never a world where he could have like not touched this.
Let's talk about where things got really dark. And I think this is probably where a lot of people either switched off or really switched in just because of how crazy outlandish things were getting. Lots of women as collateral damage. Like that seems to be one of the clear, like big criticisms of this feud, even from hip hop writers in the States. Drake accusing Kendrick of abusing his wife, Kendrick saying that Drake has a daughter, Kendrick saying that he sleeps with underage children. Bizarrely, he didn't mention anyone by name, and then Drake went out of his way to mention Millie Bobby Brown, who is she's obviously the actress from Stranger Things, and there's been all sorts of weird rumors around that after I think she was 15, said that she was texting Drake and he was giving her advice on dating. That was all very odd. That wasn't mentioned by name by Kendrick, but then Drake sort of brought her into it. Like, this did then bring in a lot of people who clearly weren't choosing to be a part of it. I'll admit that, like, while it was going on, I wasn't saying this is out of control, this is crazy. I just thought it was astonishing to see two of the biggest stars on the planet just say stuff and be willing to say it and double down and go after one another. And in some ways, I thought it was, if you accept that a lot of rap and a lot of rap beefs are kind of fictionalized, they're heightened, you just sort of say exaggerated things to get attention, didn't think in the moment it was that out of control. But when you look at it in the cold light of day and you're like, oh, the body count is piled up here. There's a lot of innocent parties to this who just like would feel really shit about being used in this particular way. I guess that's how you feel, Mel, judging by what you were saying before.
I was invested and enjoyed this when the attacks were about each other's art, creativity, authenticity. But then all of a sudden, when these kind of wild claims got brought into it, it took a very dark turn. And on one hand, I'm like, it's good that being a kind of beating up your wife or having sex with underage girls is considered bad and that they're saying it's a diss. Like that's good on one level. But there is something that feels quite wrong in weaponizing these very serious kind of issues in a battle of this format. Like, it's not really paying attention to the victims in any way, and it's just using these claims to kind of one-up each other. I think that's what is uncomfortable about it, reducing these kind of quite serious things to a diss, quote unquote.
And a lot of people have pointed out, for all of Drake's allegations about Kendrick being abusive, he is a very public supporter of Tory Lanez, who was convicted of shooting Megan Thee Stallion. Like, it's not like Drake is moral high ground here necessarily. I wonder whether part of it is also, in an era without the internet where people just sort of say vague things about like, you're an abuser, you're this, you're that. It's sort of like it floats away and you don't really know who they're talking about, if it's a specific thing, is it a current thing? But as Thomas was saying earlier, now it's like this land of Easter eggs where like, okay, this is a reference to this particular individual. I've resurfaced the TikTok video from 12 years ago. That's what this is about. So you can actually name specific people who rappers are maybe just intending to be metaphors or punchlines for a bigger point.
Yeah, I mean, I am interested too about, I guess none of them are going to the courts to sue for libel, but it is kind of incredible the things you can put in verse.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten to a weird place. And I think, one of the big criticisms has been like, if Kendrick has long suspected it or has information that Drake is running a sex trafficking ring in his Toronto mansion, like, why hasn't he brought this up earlier with the authorities and not saved it for a rap beef? And like similar with Drake, like if he has proof that Kendrick, but like it's obviously these things would never happen, but it's just like when you think about the seriousness of these allegations and they're only ever being brought up for the first time.
Snitches get stitches, Tom.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like, I think that's part of it also. It's like they wouldn't go to the police, but they want to sort of prove that they know these things and that they're better than the other person. But yeah, okay, maybe for like a sex trafficking ring, if Kendrick really thinks there's like 100 14-year-olds in Drake's mansion, maybe don't sit on that until 2024, weekend
until
of May
you
the 4th.
happen to find yourself in a rap beef where it would make for a really convenient punchline. So I think that can combine with the fact that it all just got so dark, like on Not Like Us, Yeah, as I said, I think we've both been like very, keen observers and enjoying this for what it was. But everyone I know that was really into it found themselves increasingly like, it's like, how are you supposed to respond to this? Like, I was genuinely really interested to hear each new track, but as they got more and more like, there was more and more collateral damage piling up, I was like, I don't know quite how to feel. At the end of the day, when you look at the reality of this feud, like as I've said earlier, Drake belongs to Universal Music, and Kendrick in 2020 signed a publishing deal with Universal Music, so his music is distributed by them. So at the end of the day, both of these guys are making money for the same company, which renders the whole thing a little bit crazy. Like, if you check the stream count, these songs are like rocketing up. These guys are making bank off this, even as all these people who didn't ask to be involved are now dragged into it. But really, it's Universal Music, this enormous conglomeration that's like the only one winning.
Well, and both of them, and like we've talked about it quite a bit on the pod about hip hop's kind of how you often speak about how there's not much going on in hip hop that you find exciting, and all of a sudden, look at us, we're talking about hip hop. It's exciting. So
yeah, I'm sorry to all my country friends. I'm out.
Until Morgan Wallen like smashes Luke Combs in the head with a guitar.
Well, the other rapper that's weighed in on this one, who's also signed to Universal, is Vince Staples, who is sort of like the conscience of our times right now. He sort of made the point, look, Universal's making coin of all of this. Universal has collapsed all these labels it bought up that really cared about black music, black communities. They don't care about that anymore. Hip hop is struggling. Like, this is a real thing. I think the other part of this, I think you're right, Mel, that hip hop is in a not very strong position in the US, at least right now. And a large part of that, or a significant part of that, has to do with the way that music labels are just not nurturing or supporting or encouraging talent in the way that they used to, partly because there aren't that many specific hip hop labels left. And Vince is saying, hey, Taylor Swift's got clout. You know what she talks about? She talks about the plight of artists and how to get more money for artists. These guys have enormous power and money and profile, and they are not talking about any of these issues that impact the wider hip-hop scene, which I thought was a really interesting and really sharp observation from a guy also signed to Universal who's sort of willing to call it out.
Yeah, I mean, Vince, what a man. Maybe that will be the rapper I nail my colours to. Can I ask, if you had someone from someone left field was to join this feud, it can be anyone, who would you like to see kind of weigh in now at this stage?
Well, one of the other funniest bits, as well as J. Cole sort of tapping out, was like the 48 hours that Kanye West was involved, where he released a remix of like that, and it opened with like, Kate Art, I Got You, and it just was terrible. And I think it got deleted because it wasn't a proper remix, and Future and everyone was like, get out of this, dude. We don't need you involved in this right now.
I already know my answer, and he actually did involve himself last night. Does anyone here remember Your Boy Bangs?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, as in Take You to the Movie.
Yeah.
He released a diss track to Drake last night. So, I mean, if you remember Bangs and his very odd viral hit, Take You to the Movie, Shorty, then the diss track to Drake is in much the same nature. It's very hard to read and follow. But yeah, I mean, it's bringing in everyone from all corners of hip-hop. But perhaps most surprisingly, this artist actually did involve himself, someone I never would have thought been mentioned in the same breath, but Macklemore.
Yeah, this was so interesting because Macklemore has already sort of been weirdly involved in Drake Kendrick stuff. He won the Grammy, I think 10 years ago. He beat Good Kid, Mad City. He beat a Drake record as well. And he famously shared a screenshot of a text he sent to Kendrick saying, I'm sorry, you deserve to win. And he released this really intense song this week about the not just Israel's invasion of Gaza and the amount of, death and destruction in Gaza, but also really blew up at the US government, told everyone he wasn't going to vote for Biden, defended the student protests, discussed Israel being an apartheid state. He went really, really hard on this issue, and also kind of took a pretty, it was a quick shot, but it was a shot at both Drake and Kendrick, essentially, like, you guys are wasting time arguing with each other over nothing real. Meanwhile, there's people dying, and there's student protests happening in America right now where police are, cracking down on freedom of speech.
What happened to the artist? What you gotta say? If I was on a label, you could drop me today. I'll be fine with it cause the heart fed my page. I want a ceasefire, fuck a response from Drake. What you willing to risk?
Felt like a pretty hard pivot from Macklemore, not necessarily what I expected, but people have pointed out that he's done this for a while. This is kind of what modern Macklemore does. He talks about white privilege in politics. I was sort of out of the loop on his pivot, but he really injected himself into this one.
Yeah, I mean, the Macklemore thing was a really weird addition to an increasingly strange story. But yeah, I think what's most curious now is that basically, I guess this is the longest amount of breath we've had since the weekend. Like Drake released The Heart Part 6 on Monday morning, and I think pretty much everyone saw it as a, quiet retreat. He kind of tried to be like, okay, whatever, man, I'm not doing this with you anymore. And then since then, we haven't heard anything from either artist outside of, this alleged shooting at Drake's house on Wednesday morning. So I guess most people are, I think, accepting and kind of secretly hoping that the feud is over. I don't know if it needs any more chapters. And I think, knowing Kendrick as I do, that I can't imagine him needing to weigh back in now. Like, it seems pretty obvious that he, rapped and exposed Drake into submission. And I think it's for the best for everyone involved, including the audience, and everyone mentioned that this feud is over now. It was definitely a bizarre and interesting and revealing moment in hip-hop history, and no doubt we will continue to kind of dissect it. But yeah, I personally would be so shocked if, in 2 days' time, you text me and you're like, oh my God, Kendrick just dropped again.
I agree, and I actually think that maybe Macklemore has helped just put the nail in the coffin on this one as well. I think, he sort of just said, look, guys, there's things going on. He's sort of, I think mainstream commercial hip-hop in America has been missing that political edge for a while. I think Tupac was so good at being able to throw shots at East Coast rappers and then also talk about what was going on in the world and American imperialism and whatever. And Macklemore, of all people, saying, all right, guys, let's talk about real shit again, could be the coda on this one and kind of just usher in a new conversation about many different and perhaps less personal topics that these guys were trading shots on. It's a bit of a heel turn, this next topic. Not really an easy way to segue from Kendrick, Drake, and Macklemore to Dua Lipa. I guess it's music related, but on the other end of the spectrum. It was one of the most highly anticipated releases this year, Dua Lipa's Radical Optimism, the follow-up to a very fun and critically acclaimed 2020 album, Future Nostalgia. The first single on Radical Optimism was Houdini.
I come and I go. Tell me all the ways you need me. I'm not here for long. Catch me or I go. Houdini. I come and I go. Prove you got the right to please me. Everybody knows. Catch me or I go. Houdini. Time is passing like a solar.
Produced by Australia's own Kevin Parker / Tame Impala. I didn't love this track, but then when the album came out last week, and I listened to it a few times, it's maybe the best song on it, which I think sums up how I feel about this album. Very flat record to me. I think especially following the kind of disco club vibes of Future Nostalgia, had so many bangers, levitating, physical. I don't even know if this one is a full proper pop album. There's a couple of pop songs, but do you guys remember Adult Contemporary, where you're just this is a person making noise and it's sort of nice to have in the background, but it's not doing or saying much? Mel, I know that you were hyped for this one, but how do you feel about it?
I was so hyped for this, and there was a lot of kind of chat around it because from Dance the Night, Dua's song for Barbie, there was the very symbolic shattering of the disco ball at the end of that, which was meant to represent the end of Dua's disco era. And in the lead up to the release of this album, she'd kind of been making all these claims about what had inspired the album: primal scream, Britpop, it's kind of low-slung British source material. So it kind of, she was flagging that this was going to be a reinvention. And then when I listened to this album, I just don't think it's a reinvention at all. There is a lot of classic Dua on there, but without the kind of sparkle of Future Nostalgia. But it's not a complete pivot, I don't think, for her. And I agree with you, I actually really like the first 3 songs of this album: End of an Era, Houdini, you mentioned, and Training Season. And then it kind of goes into this pivot to a more muffled sound, a very kind of Tame Impala, Kevin Parker, who produced this record, sound in songs like kind of French Exit and These Walls. There's shades of Dua again in all of them, but they're a lot more kind of drawn back. And then at the end of this album, there are these real Eurovision bangers, these kind of really big ballady sounds, which some people love, but I much prefer Dua when she's when it's all in the vocals and it's all in that really vibrant dance beat. So yeah, I thought there were highs and lows on this album, but kind of agree with you that it wasn't the it wasn't the amazing sparkly record that I kind of thought might be coming our way.
Yeah, I didn't really vibe it at all. Our colleague Rob Moran was so excited for this one, and then he just looked so crestfallen after having listened to it. Because I mean, this was the big year for like all these like massive pop albums that we're excited for.
Yeah, we previewed it, I think, at the start of the year.
I know, and this just feels like such a limp like addition to that list. Like I feel like Dua Lipa has been kind of untouchable for a while, and then it just makes you wonder like. When you like in the studio with all these different people and you listen through this album, how is no one sitting there being like, I don't know, maybe they must think it's all really good. I don't know.
There's some chat that like her dad who's taken over her management maybe isn't sort of playing the best role he should be. I agree 100%, Thomas. Like there should be some label A&Rs in here being like, okay, you want to do some of this, that's cool, but like where are the hits? Like the point of a pop record is you need some hits, and this just doesn't have them.
Yeah, and that's why you need to bring in Tedros.
That hit factory.
Talking about hits, though, there is like a hit I'm really enjoying right now. Sabrina Carpenter, who we all saw when she opened for Taylor Swift, her song Espresso.
Now he's thinking about me every night. Oh, is it that sweet? I guess so. Say you can't sleep, baby, I know. That's that me espresso. Move it up, down, left, right, oh. Switch it up like Nintendo. Say you can't sleep, baby, I know. That's that me.
This feels like the song of Northern Hemisphere summer. People are loving this song. I'm loving this song. It's very fun. It feels like it should be on a Dua record. You guys, that me espresso, you vibing it?
Man, I love it. I've listened to that song though so many times, and still I can only be like, no, espresso. Like that is the only line I can still.
You don't
get
switch
on
it up
time.
like Nintendo.
I mean,
reference to the
that's a
Nintendo
great
Switch.
line. Yeah,
There's also like I was staying out late because I'm a singer or something like that. It's very funny. There's like very
working late,
self-aware,
yeah.
funny
It is,
lyrics
yeah.
and very catchy at the same time.
in a like don't give a fuck era. I love Sabrina Carpenter. I liked Nonsense too. I know a lot of people didn't really get her vibe, but I think she's very funny and interesting and is kind of more edgy and risky in her lyrics and her performance than probably Taylor is.
Yeah, I think she could be on the cusp of blowing up. She does this really fun thing on a tour where she sort of adds an extra verse at the end of her sets to reference where she's at, and sometimes it's pretty saucy. It's cool. I think she's fun and interesting, and the song is really catchy. Are you bumping this one, T. Mitch?
Yeah, I really like it. I like Sabrina too. I feel like she's like having a bit of a moment. So she was also at the Met Gala yesterday, along with Barry.
Barry killing her partner. If people don't know.
Yes, correct. I think she's good. You can just see like the trajectory she's on. Obviously, she toured here with Taylor Swift recently. Sadly, I did not get to see her because her set was rained out.
True.
Electrical storm. But everyone that I had spoken to, all the Swifties who had gone, like every single night, were like, raving about Sabrina Carpenter as much as they were Taylor. So I feel like she's really on one. She's about to, or just is the musical act on SNL.
And her Coachella set went kind of off as well. People raved about it. Barry was there watching.
Yeah, she's collecting like all the pop culture rings you need when you're on the way to being like the next big thing. And then obviously she will enter into a feud with Olivia Rodrigo that we will then talk about.
I think she hasn't she?
Yeah, but like a proper public one where Olivia Rodrigo is like, I don't know, revealed to be
I see. You
like
were
an
doing a
alien
cool
or something.
Drake Kendrick thing and I stepped on it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
But I think they
good,
sort
it's
of
fun.
threw barbs at each other over driver's license. Is that what happened?
Yeah, they did. Because I think there was also an accusation of a shared boyfriend or something.
I mean, that's pretty hectic. That is, we're talking Drake Kendrick level, Mel. Where were you when that was going on? Not complaining about collateral damage.
Exactly.
Where were you guys?
It really is the winter of discontent.
Oh, nice. Thank you. I'm glad you've stooped to my levels.
All right, movie time, guys. There's been a lot of discourse in entertainment news around the release of the new Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt action comedy, The Fall Guy, which was filmed in Sydney, Australia.
That's me, Colt Sievers, and this is my hero's journey.
We just start from the top.
Okay, I'm not the hero of this story. I'm just a stunt guy. Trying to look cool in front of the director of this movie. That's her.
It's been a slow start to the year in terms of box office numbers, and I think after the massive Barbenheimer-induced high of 2023, studios and cinema chains are kind of really desperately craving some big releases to get people back into the movies. This was an expensive film. It cost $150 million to make. It's got big stars, big action set pieces in it. So there's a bit riding on it. We'll talk about its performance and what that might mean for Hollywood in a minute, but let's talk about the film and kind of interested to get your takes on it as well. It's a loose adaptation of the 1980s TV series of the same name, starring Lee Majors. I never watched it. I just know Lee Majors because he was in a Simpsons episode. I think Marge had a big crush on him. The movie's directed by David Leitch. He's a former stuntman himself. He co-directed the first John Wick film, directed Deadpool 2, the Fast and Furious spin-off Hobbs and Shaw, and most recently, the Brad Pitt starring Bullet Train. This film really is a love letter to stunt performers. It stars Ryan Gosling as a stuntman who, after quitting his job, after getting into an accident on set, is convinced to get back in the game, working on his ex-girlfriend's directorial debut action film. That's played by Emily Blunt. The movie's filming in Australia. When he gets there, he finds himself involved in a conspiracy surrounding the disappearance of the film's lead actor, Aaron Taylor Johnson. The film also stars Hannah Waddingham from Ted Lasso, Teresa Palmer, Stephanie Sue, and Winston Duke. The movie's basically a love story between Gosling and Blunt with a lot of action, a lot of stunts, a lot of fun references to cinema and pop culture in there. I would describe it as like thoroughly entertaining, pretty fun, but not like a transcendent movie. I thought Gosling in particular was really great, and Emily Blunt was good, but her character does not have a lot to do or much depth in this film. I had a good time in the cinema, but I don't know if I describe it as a must-watch. What did you guys make of The Fall Guy?
I did not have a good time in the cinema for this. I didn't. I really wanted to like it. In fact, I sat down next to Thomas and I said to him, I'm really happy. Like I was in the right headspace to watch it. And I kept thinking about this. This one time I was going to my friend's house and we all had to bring a dessert. And I decided I would make an eaten mess, which is just like a strategically, it looks like a mess, but it isn't a mess and it tastes delicious. And when I ended up making it, it turned out just a mess. Like looked like something that someone had eaten and then regurgitated. And I kind of felt like watching this, I was like, someone thought this would be a good idea, but it's just turned out to be a bit of a mess. I didn't enjoy it. There was too much action. Like I understand it's a love letter to stunts, but there was so much spectacle and no story. Gosling's character was confusing and seemed undercooked. To be honest, I was probably most alert during the credits when they were showing the real footage of the stunts being made. And I actually thought, wow, I think I would actually prefer to watch a documentary about making this film than this film. I just did not enjoy it.
I kind of feel the same. I actually think, like, I'm so really surprised you said you thought Gosling was good. I thought he was bad. Like, we all love the Gosling, and he's kind of like on a bit of a heater off the back of Barbie and this kind of comedy era. And I just thought he was like, the first 15 minutes, especially, I was like, wow, he is like not making me laugh. And this is someone who I think normally can take a really poor script and just with his like Gosling delivery can make it funny. And so I don't know if it's an indictment on the script, but I thought my biggest issue with the film was that the chemistry between the two leads, Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, was like near non-existent for me. I thought he was in the scene doing his Gosling shtick and she was doing her Emily Blunt shtick of like talking really fast and seeming distracted, but they weren't like, it's like the two people acting in a scene like of their own, not together. And I just thought they didn't gel. And then on top of that, I thought that the story was like a little bit flimsy. It was hard to kind of like get involved. I really went into this being like, this will be a fun kind of like Netflix movie and it'll be like funny and a good time. And instead I just like found myself really drifting.
And the jokes just didn't land in our cinema, right? Which is kind of like, I thought, because David Leitch did Bullet Train, which I thought was very funny, but the jokes in our cinema didn't land. Like it was just really quite awkward watching one
how busy
after
was your
another.
cinema?
Not very busy. There's only a few people.
None of us laughed.
I would say though, and like, you know, I do have to caveat all this with like a friend of mine is in the film and I actually thought he was great. His name is Adam Dunn, Australian actor, played Nigel, who was singing, you know, Genie in a Bottle during the karaoke
he
scene.
is great in the movie.
Yeah, he was really good. And, you know, like I'm saying all this, I know he listens to the podcast. We had a, you know, very honest chat on text after the movie where he asked me what I thought. He asked me to send a thumbs up or thumbs down, which is a reference from the film. And I said all of this to him and, you know, he had his own thoughts and we had a really interesting chat. And I said to him that I didn't believe the chemistry between the two leads and he was really surprised by that because he saw how hard they were working on the film. So, you know, it's an interesting, I guess, perspective to have. But yeah, I went in so prepared to love this film because it had so many elements that I was excited for, including the fact it was shot here in beautiful Sydney. And yeah, I just, for some reason, like it didn't work for me. Like I loved The Grey Man. Like I'm so here for these kind of like dumb Netflix films. And this one just felt aside from the fact it was 45 minutes too long, it just didn't seem to work. It was, having discussed so much about the mid-era, this was like mid to a T for me.
I reckon you guys are in the wrong cinema with the wrong people. Like I thought that the jokes were funny. I thought Ryan Gosling was funny. I thought the chemistry was great. I thought that when Ryan Gosling is crying to Taylor Swift's All Too Well, that was great. It was very moving.
But even that for me felt like such a like heavy-handed, like, there's been so many funny, like, let's have a, like guy listening to Taylor Swift and being emotional scene. Let's just like wedge it in there. It felt so forced to me.
Yeah, I thought that was ironic. I thought they were making fun of scenes of men
I reckon
crying
you were in
to
the
Taylor
wrong gear
Swift.
for this movie. You're in the wrong gear for this movie.
We were
No,
in the
we were both
right
soaking.
gear.
We got a beer.
We were happy.
Mel had what did you have? Like some kind of wrap?
Yeah, I had food for once in the cinema. I cannot tell you how ready we were to love this film.
All right, let's agree to disagree on this one. And maybe you have more in common with the regular folk who don't seem to be rushing to see this, which is freaking some distributors and studios and movie chains out. I think they were expecting this movie, which generally has gotten pretty good reviews. Like it's sort of like 3.5 to 4 stars around the place. It's doing pretty well on Rotten Tomatoes. People think it's the kind of movie that should be bringing people to cinemas, and it's not. And I wonder whether that's because, like I said at the start, I had a fun time, but I'm not racing out of the cinema and saying, you've all got to go see The Fall Guy. I think sometimes it's the problem with Rotten Tomatoes where it's 90% positive, but if every positive review is like 3 stars, that doesn't get you excited enough to actually be an enthused ambassador for this film. I also wonder, and Thomas, you mentioned The Grey Man. My friend Amy messaged me and was like, oh, you saw The Fall Guy. I see that. Isn't that Free Guy? I've seen that one before, which is a different movie with Ryan Reynolds. And there's also The Nice Guys. There's a lot of guy films around featuring Ryans. And I wonder whether that is just confusing people, as dumb as that sounds, or whether people are like, cool, I'll wait for this movie to come out on streaming. It looks like mid-tier entertainment. If I don't have to go out to the movies and pay $25 for it, I'll have a good time.
Well, Mel, you did say to me, I wonder if I would have liked this film better if I watched it on a Saturday night when it popped up on Netflix and I'd had like a couple of glasses of wine and like I just popped it on and this, like, it was just a Saturday night. Like,
yeah, if I could talk all the way through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like potentially.
I think potentially. I think maybe it will have a big streaming run as well. But yeah, I wonder what it means if it doesn't make its box office money back. That's not a great result for this film or for Hollywood making big movies. Can I ask you guys about Sydney on film?
Sweeney?
Kind of. So we had Anyone But You, which was obviously filmed and set in Sydney, and a lot of gratuitous shots of Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House and Sydney Harbour. And then this movie was filmed basically the same place. Like I was wondering if when Ryan Gosling is on a boat in Sydney Harbour, he was going to run into Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney on their boat. Maybe it's just because the proximity of these two movies are really close together and they've both, gotten a lot of media attention. I love Sydney. I love seeing Sydney on film. I feel like they could do a bit more than just show us the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge and 2 or 3 blocks in the city around Martin Place. So this is a big, beautiful, interesting, diverse, fun city. When you're in New York, not everything needs to be in Manhattan, the Empire State Building. You can go to Brooklyn. Not everything in London needs to be around the Big Ben. Is there a bit of cringe here with the way that Sydney is just the city and the harbour?
Yeah, I think so. It was like, I know everyone was like excited to see the, Harbour Bridge stunt with Ryan Gosling, and we'd all had a bit of context because all of the news cameras were hovering above the Harbour Bridge while he filmed it. But I do find it a bit boring. And Sydney, it may as well have been any other city aside from the set piece on the Harbour Bridge and seeing the Opera House. Like, it just felt like, it could have been Toronto or New York or Chicago or wherever. Like, I don't know. I agree. I'm like, it'd be so nice to see them in a national park or in the western suburbs or somewhere that was still Sydney and recognizable as Sydney, but just not, the 2 biggest icons that we're known for. I'm surprised they didn't go down to Bondi Beach.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd be curious to see when the New South Wales government and federal government cough up the funding to help bring these international films here, what the terms and conditions are.
I'm 100% sure that the only reason there is so many shots of the Opera House is because the state government, which gives a lot of money for these movies, have said, that's what we want. And I kind of think maybe it's not the director's fault as much as it's the government being like, let's just turn every movie into an ad for Sydney. But we're so, I guess, scared of telling people that Sydney is more than the bridge or the Opera House. We don't want them to go west or south or wherever.
That's why, again, thanks to Taylor Swift for bringing us to the attention of Sydney Zoo in the western suburbs. Taylor, like, the more we talk about her, the more I'm impressed. She's a trailblazer.
Oh, they could go to what's that sandwich shop you like, Thomas, in your part of town?
Costa's?
Yeah.
See, they could have gone to Costa's.
Could they not have had a sandwich at Costa's?
That's iconic. I mean, even there's like Chifley Tower was in it. But yeah, otherwise it was like, it's, hardly even worth like getting excited about Sydney being in the film. Yeah, I don't know. I think there are lots of other better Sydney films if that's what you're after.
All right, let's wrap up with Impress Your Friends, where we share something we watched, read, listened to, or just enjoyed consuming in the past week. Do you want to go first, Thomas?
My one is a TV series, just to mix things up. It's out today on Netflix. It's called Bodkin. Actually, a weird kind of Fall Guy tie-in in that the series is produced and directed by Nash Edgerton, who is a stuntman, as well as being Joel Edgerton's brother, who also makes a cameo in the Fall Guy. But he's also a director. He directs this series. It's very funny. It's a dark comedy in the kind of that vein of Irish TV that we all know and love. And you guys will enjoy this. It's about a group of 3 podcasters.
Is it really?
It really is. Who come together. They work at The Guardian. Boo. But they come together and basically one of the lead journalists, she's been working on a big story in London, and she gets exiled to her hometown in Ireland to work on this series with 2 other podcasters about a group of people that went missing 20 years ago. They slowly find themselves kind of like wrapped up in the intricacies and feuds of the small town. So it's that type of setup, but very funny, and I think lots of people buy into the podcast culture, and this has lots of moments they will enjoy about how serious, true crime podcasters take themselves. So yeah, I thought it was really funny. Each episode is 45 minutes. It's a Netflix drop, so everything's there available for you to watch. That one's out today, and yeah, worth your time.
The amount of movies or TV shows that are featuring podcasters as characters. In the new Godzilla movie, again, Brian Tyree Henry's a podcaster. It's very strange. I really wonder why that.
It's a sexy medium, right?
Well, podcasters are the new hard-nosed journalists of 90s films.
Agreed. Mel, what have you got?
Well, after everyone has listened to Kendrick and Drake and you've kind of been through their whole kind of feud, this is a nice one to put in your earphones. I've been really vibing Jessica Pratt's Here in the Pitch, which is her new album. It's only 9 songs, 27 minutes. There's something light and sunny to them and almost airless, as well as this kind of sense of sadness on them. It does kind of feel like maybe stepping into the Met Garden. There's this kind of fantasy sound. I don't know. It's just one of those albums that I keep finding myself listening to. Some albums I'm kind of like, you got to be in the right mood and you got to kind of be in the right state of mind. I found that a lot with the Beyonce album. I'm not necessarily gravitating towards putting it on, but this one just seems to be one that I keep returning to. So it's a really nice kind of folk retro pop classic sound that I would highly recommend if you need to come down from all the kind of highs of the rap battle.
You put me onto this one yesterday, Mel, and I have been listening to it. I really like it. It's a great recommendation. Very, very good album.
Oh, good. I can imagine you in your new home putting it on.
I got one that I'm surprised now the review mentioned. Hack Season 3 is back.
Yes.
Gene Smart is back. It's on Stan, owned by Nine, the people who pay us to make this podcast. The Cinema Herald and The Age is probably more convoluted than it needed to be. It's great. There's not much more I need to say about this show. I really, really love Hacks. I've been waiting for the new season for a while. Go watch it. Very fun.
It is very funny.
Very excited to watch
I did text you last night. That should not be a weekly drop, that show. The first 2 episodes were they dropped 2 at the start, and now it's weekly from moving forward. Annoying. Doesn't need to be weekly drop. The episode's 30 minutes. It's a comedy. That could be bang. Just give us all of it and you can watch it at your own leisure. No one is anyone really hyped on a Tuesday night to get the new Hacks and then watch it for 30 minutes? You want to watch 3 or 4?
It does feel like the binge is reversed. Things that should not be binges are, and the other way around. Someone's got to sort this out. They should put us in charge of just every TV show. We come in and we're like, doesn't matter what platform it's on, we'll tell you the release format for this one.
Yeah, once we finish solving crimes in a tiny Irish town.
Guys, great chat. Take care. See you next week.
Bye.
This episode of The Drop was produced by Chi Wong. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode of The Drop, make sure to follow us in your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, or better yet, share it with a friend. I'm Osman Faruqi. See you next week.